Have you ever felt like you were invisible in your own family? Like no matter how hard you tried, you were always overshadowed by someone else? That was my life. My brother Ethan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. He got the praise, the attention, and, as I would soon find out, everything in my father's will. But what Ethan didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my mother had a secret so big it would change everything. This is the story of how I went from being the forgotten daughter to discovering a legacy that would not only change my life, but the lives of so many others. And it all started the day we sat down to hear my father's will. The mahogany-paneled law office felt suffocating as Mr. Richardson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice steady and measured as he read our father's will. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, while my brother Ethan lounged in his custom-tailored suit, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The Carter family business, including all assets, properties, and investments, will be transferred to Ethan James Carter, Mr. Richardson continued, his words echoing what I'd expected all along. At 29, I was watching the final act of my father's lifelong favoritism play out exactly as scripted. I glanced at Ethan, now 35, looking every bit the successful businessman our father had groomed him to be. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the office lights, his Rolex catching the sunlight streaming through the window, another gift from Dad last Christmas. Everything about him screamed success in our father's eyes. Harvard Business School graduate, CEO of the family company by 30, married to a socialite, father of 2 perfect children. Me? I was the family disappointment. A public school art teacher who preferred paint-stained jeans to designer suits. The daughter who chose to inspire young minds rather than chase profit margins. The one who walked away from the suitable man Dad had picked out, refusing to marry into a business merger disguised as love. And to Emma Marie Carter, Mr. Richardson cleared his throat, a collection of family photographs and your grandmother's jewelry box. Ethan's chuckle cut through the silence. Well, Em, at least you got something to remember the good old days by, though I'm not sure where you'll display them in that tiny apartment of yours. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Are we finished here, Mr. Richardson? The lawyer nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't making a scene. He'd probably seen enough inheritance battles to last a lifetime. Emma, Ethan called as I reached the door, his voice dripping with false concern. We should discuss your future. Maybe there's a position at Carter Industries for you, something entry-level, of course. Can't have you struggling on a teacher's salary forever. I turned, offering him a small smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's generous, Ethan, but I'll manage just fine. The autumn air hit my face as I left the building, crisp and clean. Mom had loved this season, the way the leaves turned gold and red, nature's last burst of creativity before winter. She would have hated what Dad had done today. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Dinner tonight? We really should talk about arrangements. I ignored it, just as I'd been ignoring his hollow gestures of concern since Dad's funeral last week. Instead, I drove home to my tiny apartment, a charming converted loft I'd bought mortgaged-free 3 years ago, though my family didn't know that part. There was something I needed to check, something Mom had given me before she passed away 2 years ago. The loft was quiet as I stepped inside, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and headed straight to my small office. My heart was pounding, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the memory of Mom's voice, soft but insistent, as she handed me the envelope 2 years ago. Don't open this until after your father is gone, she had said, her frail hands gripping mine tightly. Promise me, Emma. I had promised. And now, with Dad gone and the weight of his will pressing down on me, I finally understood why she'd been so adamant. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the thick manila envelope. It felt heavier than I remembered, as if it carried not just papers but the weight of something far greater. I sat down, carefully peeling back the flap. and pulled out a stack of documents. On top was a letter, written in Mom's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Emma," it began. "If you're reading this, it means your father is gone, and I'm sure he's done exactly what I feared. Your father was a brilliant businessman, but he never understood what truly mattered. He let his pride and his narrow vision blind him to the most valuable thing he had, a daughter with creativity, compassion, and the courage to see the world differently." I blinked back tears as I read on. While your father was building Carter Industries, I was quietly building something of my own. 20 years ago, I began investing in art programs, education initiatives, and creative startups. Your passion for art and teaching inspired me, even when your father dismissed it as a waste of time. I saw the future in your work, Emma, and I wanted to support it in my own way. I paused, my hands trembling as I sifted through the documents beneath the letter. Stock certificates, investment portfolios, bank statements. The numbers were staggering. Mom had built an empire, one that rivaled, if not surpassed, the value of Carter Industries, and it was all in my name. "These holdings have been transferred to you, slowly and legally over the years," the letter continued. "Your father never noticed because he never thought to look. Ethan can't touch a cent of it. This is your legacy, Emma. Use it wisely, build something meaningful, make the difference I always knew you could." I sat back in my chair, the enormity of what I was holding sinking in. Mom had believed in me, even when no one else in the family did. While Dad and Ethan had been busy chasing profits and power, she had quietly built a future for me, one that aligned with my values, not theirs. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another text from Ethan. "Seriously, Emma, we need to talk about your plans. Dad would have wanted us to work together." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. "You're right, we should talk. Why don't you come over tomorrow morning? I have something to show you." That night, I stayed up late, poring over the documents Mom had left me. Her investments weren't just about money. They were about impact. She had funded art programs in underserved communities, supported education initiatives for underprivileged kids, and invested in creative startups that were changing the world. It was everything I had ever dreamed of doing, but on a scale I never thought possible. I thought about Ethan sitting smugly in the lawyer's office, so sure of his place at the top of the Carter family hierarchy. He had no idea what Mom had done, no idea that the quiet, supportive wife he had always underestimated had outmaneuvered him in every way that mattered. Tomorrow, I thought, as I carefully locked the documents in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, Ethan would finally see the truth. At exactly 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing my sweater as I walked to the door. Ethan stood on the other side, dressed in his usual business casual, a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks. His cologne was overpowering, as if he were heading to a board meeting instead of his younger sister's modest loft. "Emma," he said, flashing a practiced smile, "I'm glad you finally came to your senses. We have a lot to discuss." I stepped aside, letting him in. His eyes swept over the space, lingering on the mismatched furniture and the art supplies scattered across the dining table. I could see the faint curl of disdain at the corner of his mouth. "'Tis cozy," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But we really need to talk about your future. Dad would have wanted you to be taken care of, and I think there's a way for us to work together." I ignored his comment and gestured toward the dining table, where I had laid out the documents Mom had left me. "You're right, Ethan. We do need to talk. There's something Mom wanted you to see." His brow furrowed as he approached the table, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "What's this?" he asked, picking up the first document. "A stock certificate for one of Mom's investments." "Just keep reading," I said, crossing my arms and leaning against the wall. I watched as his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to something darker. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the papers, his face growing redder with each passing moment. This can't be real," he stammered, his voice rising. Mom didn't know anything about business. She was just a housewife. I almost laughed at the irony. That's what you and Dad always thought, isn't it? That she was just there to support you two while you played king of the castle. But Mom was smarter than both of you combined. She built this empire right under your noses, and you never even noticed. Ethan slammed the papers down on the table, his jaw clenched. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she tell us? Because she knew you wouldn't understand, I said, my voice steady. She knew you'd try to take control, just like you've always done. But this wasn't meant for you, Ethan. It was meant for me. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. So what? You're just going to sit on this fortune and let it go to waste? You don't know the first thing about managing money, Emma. You're a teacher, for God's sake. I felt a flicker of anger, but kept my composure. I may not be a businessman like you, but I know what I want to do with this. Mom didn't leave me this money to hoard it or use it for power plays. She wanted me to make a difference, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Ethan's laugh was sharp and bitter. A difference? What does that even mean? You're going to throw it all away on art projects and charity? That's not how the real world works, Emma. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze head-on. The real world is changing, Ethan. People care about more than just profits. They care about impact, about leaving something meaningful behind. Mom saw that. She believed in it, and she believed in me. For a moment, he said nothing, his face a mask of barely contained frustration. Then, as if flipping a switch, he slipped back into his usual smooth, persuasive tone. Look, Emma, I'm not saying you shouldn't do your little projects, but think about what we could do together. If we combined Mom's investments with Carter Industries, we could expand globally. We could honor both of their legacies. I shook my head, a small, sad smile on my lips. No, Ethan, that's not what Mom wanted, and it's not what I want. You got exactly what Dad intended for you. The company, the properties, the power. This is my path, and I'm going to follow it. His mask slipped for just a second, revealing something raw beneath. Anger, fear, maybe even hurt. But he recovered quickly, standing abruptly and straightening his shirt. You're making a mistake, he said coldly. Maybe, I replied, but at least it's mine to make. Ethan stormed out, his expensive shoes striking the pavement with every furious step. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and a quiet sense of triumph. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally stepping out of his shadow. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. For years, I had felt like the forgotten Carter sibling, the one who didn't fit into the family mold. But now, with Mom's legacy in my hands, I finally had the chance to prove that success wasn't just about money or power. It was about impact. I spent the next few weeks diving into the details of Mom's investments. Her portfolio wasn't just impressive, it was visionary. She had funded art programs in underserved communities, supported education initiatives for underprivileged children, and invested in creative startups that were making waves in the tech and sustainability sectors. Every decision she had made reflected her belief in the power of creativity and education to change lives. I started small, reaching out to a few of the organizations Mom had supported. One of them, a nonprofit that provided free art classes to kids in low-income neighborhoods, immediately caught my attention. Their funding had been cut recently, and they were on the verge of shutting down. I knew this was where I wanted to begin. I met with the director, a kind woman named Sarah, who had been running the program out of a cramped community center. When I told her about my plans to fund the program and expand it, she looked at me like I had just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This could change everything for us." "I'm serious," I said, smiling. "But I don't just want to write a check. I want to be involved. I want to help build something that lasts." Over the next few months, I threw myself into the project. We found a larger space for the program, hired more instructors, and expanded the curriculum to include not just painting and drawing, but also digital art, photography, and even music. The kids who came through our doors weren't just learning skills. They were finding a safe space to express themselves, to dream, to believe in their own potential. The media started to take notice. Local news outlets ran stories about the program, highlighting the impact it was having on the community. Parents sent letters thanking us for giving their children opportunities they never thought possible. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that truly mattered. But not everyone was happy about my success. Ethan had been keeping tabs on me, and it didn't take long for him to show up unannounced at the new art center. He walked in like he owned the place, his sharp suit and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of the studio. "Ella," he said, his tone clipped. "We need to talk." I sighed, setting down the paintbrush I'd been using to help a group of kids with a mural. "What is it, Ethan?" He gestured around the room, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. "This is what you're doing with Mom's money? Art classes? Do you have any idea how much potential you're wasting?" I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. "I'm not wasting anything. I'm investing in people, in communities. This is exactly what Mom wanted." Ethan shook his head, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "You don't get it, do you? This could have been so much bigger. If you'd just worked with me, we could have turned this into something global. Instead, you're playing teacher in a glorified daycare." His words stung, but I refused to let him see it. "This isn't about you, Ethan. It's not about Dad or the company or your idea of success. This is about making a difference, one life at a time. And if you can't see the value in that, then maybe you're the one wasting potential." For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The kids in the room looked up, startled, and I forced a smile, reassuring them that everything was fine. But as I watched Ethan leave, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. He was so consumed by his need for control, for validation, that he couldn't see what really mattered. I wondered if he ever would. In the weeks that followed, I continued to expand the program, partnering with other nonprofits and even securing grants to fund additional projects. We launched a scholarship program for young artists, giving them the chance to pursue their dreams without the burden of financial stress. The Art Center became a hub of creativity and hope, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and find common ground. And yet, despite all the progress we were making, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Mom had always believed in the power of family, even when ours was fractured. She had left me this incredible gift, but she had also left me a responsibility to try in whatever way I could to bring Ethan back into the fold. I wasn't sure how to do it or if it was even possible, but I knew I had to try. It started with whispers in the business world. Rumors of trouble at Carter Industries. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Ethan had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in Dad's eyes. But as the weeks went by, the whispers grew louder, and soon they were impossible to ignore. I saw the first headline while scrolling through my phone one morning. Carter Industries faces financial turmoil amid investor concerns. My stomach twisted as I read the article. The company was struggling. Ethan's aggressive expansion plans had backfired, leaving them over-leveraged and vulnerable. Key investors were pulling out, and the stock price was plummeting. I wanted to feel vindicated, to relish the irony of Ethan's downfall after all his smug lectures about my wasted potential. But instead I felt a pang of worry. Despite everything, he was still my brother. A few days later, I got a call from an old family friend, Mr. Harper, who had been one of Dad's closest business partners. His voice was grave. "Emma, I don't know if you've been following the news, but Ethan's in trouble. The board is considering removing him as CEO." I sat down, the weight of his words sinking in. What happened? Ethan took some big risks. Mr. Harper explained. He wanted to expand into international markets, but the timing was all wrong. The company's bleeding money, and the investors have lost confidence in him. If something doesn't change soon, Carter Industries could go under. I thanked him for the call and hung up, my mind racing. Ethan had always been so sure of himself, so certain that he was the rightful heir to Dad's empire. But now, it seemed like the very thing he had fought so hard to control was slipping through his fingers. That evening, I found myself standing outside Ethan's office building. It was late, and the lights on the top floor were still on. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked inside. The receptionist was gone for the night, so I took the elevator up to the executive floor. Ethan's office door was slightly ajar, and I could see him sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. He looked exhausted, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. "Ethan," I said softly, stepping into the room. He looked up, startled. For a moment he just stared at me, as if he couldn't believe I was there. Then he sighed, leaning back in his chair. "What do you want, Emma? Come to gloat?" I shook my head, pulling up a chair across from him. "No, I came to see if you're okay." He let out a bitter laugh. "Do I look okay? The company's falling apart, the board's ready to kick me out, and I've got reporters camped outside my house, so no, I'm not okay." I studied him for a moment, trying to reconcile the confident, arrogant brother I'd always known with the man sitting in front of me now. "Ethan, why didn't you ask for help?" "Help?" he scoffed. "From who, you?" "Don't take this the wrong way, Emma, but you're the last person I'd expect to understand what I'm dealing with." I ignored the jab, leaning forward. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to run a company like Carter Industries, but I do know what it's like to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I know that you don't have to do it alone." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's too late, Emma. The damage is done." "Maybe," I said gently. "But maybe it's not. You're not the only one who cares about this family, Ethan. Mom believed in both of us, even if Dad didn't. And I think it's time we started believing in each other." For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly. "Maybe we can figure it out together," I said. It wasn't a promise to save the company or to undo the mistakes he'd made, but it was a start. The next morning, Ethan showed up at my loft unannounced. He looked different. Less polished, less guarded. For the first time in years, he seemed human, vulnerable. He stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee and gave me a small, hesitant smile. "I figured we could talk," he said, holding out one of the cups. I took it, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in. I was just about to start going through some plans for the art center." He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the stacks of papers and sketches spread across the dining table. "You've been busy," he said, his tone softer than usual. "Yeah," I replied, sitting down and motioning for him to join me. "There's a lot to do, but it's worth it. The center's growing faster than I expected, and we're starting to see real results. Kids are thriving, Ethan. They're finding their voices." He sat down across from me, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about Mom, about how she believed in both of us." He paused, his gaze dropping to the table. "I think I've spent so much time trying to live up to Dad's expectations that I forgot what it means to actually care about something, to build something meaningful." I studied him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "Ethan, you've always been good at building things. You just need to figure out what you want to build." He nodded slowly, then looked up at me. "I want to help. With the art center, with the programs, with whatever you're doing. I don't know much about art, but I know how to manage projects and handle finances. Maybe I can use what I'm good at to support what you're good at." I blinked, caught off guard. This was the last thing I'd expected from him. "You're serious?" "Yeah." he said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I'm serious. I've been so focused on saving Carter Industries that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Mom's legacy isn't just about money or investments. It's about people. And I think it's time I started honoring that. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Okay, I said, nodding. But if we're going to do this, we do it my way. The focus stays on the community, on the kids, on making a real difference. Agreed, he said, holding out his hand. I shook it, feeling a strange sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into the work. He helped streamline the center's operations, secured additional funding through grants and partnerships, and even used his connections to bring in sponsors for our programs. At first, the staff and volunteers were wary of him. His reputation as a cutthroat businessman preceded him, but he surprised everyone with his dedication and willingness to learn. One afternoon, I found him sitting in the corner of the studio, watching a group of kids work on a mural. He looked out of place in his tailored shirt and slacks, but there was a softness in his expression that I hadn't seen before. They're incredible, he said as I approached. The way they see the world, the way they express themselves, it's inspiring. I smiled, sitting down beside him. This is what Mom believed in. She saw the potential in people, even when no one else did. He nodded, his gaze still on the kids. I think I'm starting to understand that. As the months went by, the Art Center became a beacon of hope in the community. We expanded our programs, launched new initiatives, and even hosted a citywide art festival that brought people together in ways I never thought possible. Ethan and I worked side by side, combining our strengths to create something neither of us could have done alone. For the first time in years, I felt like we were truly a family. A year later, the Art Center was thriving in ways I could have never imagined. The once cramped community program had grown into a vibrant hub of creativity, education, and hope. We had expanded to include workshops for adults, scholarships for young artists, and even a mentorship program that paired local professionals with aspiring creatives. The walls of the center were covered in murals painted by the kids, each one telling a story of resilience, growth, and possibility. The annual art festival we had launched months earlier had become a citywide event, drawing thousands of people from all over. It wasn't just about art anymore. It was about community, about connection, about showing people that creativity could bring us together in ways nothing else could. Ethan had become an integral part of it all. He had traded his sharp suits for rolled-up sleeves and a hands-on approach that surprised everyone, including me. He wasn't just managing the finances or securing partnerships anymore. He was part of the heart of the center. I'd even caught him painting with the kids a few times, though he'd never admit it. One evening, after the festival had wrapped up and the last of the volunteers had gone home, Ethan and I sat on the steps of the Arts Center, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The air was warm, filled with the faint hum of laughter and music from the festival. You know, Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence, I never thought I'd find myself here, doing this, but I think Mom was right. This is what matters. I smiled, leaning back on my hands. She always saw the best in us, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about Carter Industries, about what it could have been if I'd focused less on expansion and more on impact. I don't want to make that mistake again. What are you saying? I asked, turning to look at him. I'm saying I want to start over, he said, his voice steady. Not with the company, but with something new. Something that aligns with what we're doing here. Maybe it's a foundation, maybe it's a partnership. I don't know yet. But I want to build something meaningful, Emma. Like Mom did. Like you're doing. For the first time, I saw a version of Ethan that I could truly believe in. Not the ambitious, power-hungry businessman, but the brother I'd always hoped he could be. I reached over, squeezing his shoulder. We'll figure it out. Together. As we sat there, watching the city settle into the quiet of the night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Mom's legacy wasn't just the money or the investments. It was the belief that we could be more, that we could create something that mattered. And for the first time, I knew we were living up to that. Ethan and I had found our way back to each other, not as rivals, but as partners, as family. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.